The massive space station looked like a city built among the stars. John Carter pressed his face against the small window of the Earthship UES Liberty and watched as they moved closer to the giant structure. The station was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It stretched for miles in every direction with towers that twisted and curved in ways that seemed impossible. Lights flickered across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. John was 53 years old and had spent most of his life talking to world leaders and making deals between countries. He had gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes from years of difficult conversations. Today he wore his best Earth diplomatic uniform, which was dark blue with gold buttons. The uniform looked simple compared to what he knew he would. See inside the alien station. Captain Lisa Brooks stood behind him, checking her equipment one more time. She was 35 with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had been a soldier before becoming a diplomat's bodyguard. Her hand stayed near her weapon even though they were supposed to be here for peace talks. Old habits were hard to break. Dr. Robert Kane sat at a nearby table going over his notes for the 100th time. He was the smartest person John had ever met, but he looked nervous. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages of his research. Robert had studied every piece of information Earth had about the alien races they were about to meet. Most of that information was not encouraging. The ship's captain spoke over the intercom in a calm voice that did not hide his worry. Ambassador Carter, we are beginning docking procedures now. The alien station is sending us guidance signals. We should be connected in 10 minutes. John nodded even though the captain could not see him. 10 minutes until humanity's first real meeting with the galactic community. 10 minutes until they found out if Earth would be welcomed among the stars or sent home like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for 50 years. They had seen humans split the atom and launch rockets and build computers. They had watched the wars and the pollution and the struggles of a young species trying to find its place. Most of the time they just watched like scientists studying animals in a zoo, but 3 months ago everything changed. Earth had detected their signals and sent a message back. The message was simple. It said hello and asked if anyone wanted to talk. The aliens had been surprised. Most species took thousands of years longer to develop the technology to hear galactic communications. Humans had done it much faster than expected. The council had debated for weeks about what to do. Some wanted to ignore the humans completely. Others thought it might be amusing to see what the young species had to say. In the end, they decided to invite one Earth ship to their station. It was probably meant as entertainment more than serious. Diplomacy. John felt the ship shake slightly as the docking clamps connected. Through the window he could see alien creatures moving around on the station's docking bay. They were tall and made of what looked like living crystal. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. These were the Zephyrians, and they would be running today's meeting. Ambassador Lisa said quietly, the airlock is ready. The aliens say their atmosphere is safe for humans, but I still think you should wear the breathing mask. John shook his head. If we show up looking like we're afraid of their air, they'll think we're even more primitive than they already do. We need to look confident even if we don't feel it. Robert looked up from his notes with worry in his eyes. John, these beings have been traveling between stars since before humans learned to farm. Their technology is so advanced we can barely understand it. They can manipulate matter at the atomic level, and some of them don't even have physical bodies anymore. What could we possibly offer them that they don't already have? It was a good question, and John had been asking himself the same thing for months. Earth had nothing that could compete with alien technology. Humans were new to space travel and still fought wars over resources. They had no great wisdom to share and no advanced science to offer. All they had was themselves. The airlock opened with a soft hiss and alien air flowed into the ship. It smelled different from Earth air. There was a metallic taste to it and something else that John could not identify. The artificial gravity felt slightly different too, though he could not say exactly how. 3 Zephyrians waited for them in the docking bay. They were beautiful in a way that was completely unlike human beauty. Their crystal bodies were clear in some places and colored in others. When they moved, the light seemed to move with them, creating patterns that shifted and flowed. John had to force himself not to stare. The middle Zephyrian spoke, and its voice came from everywhere at once. The sound was like music played on instruments John had never heard. A small device on John's belt translated the words into English, though something was lost in the translation. Humans from the third planet of Sol System, you are welcome to Council Station Harmony. I am Veltar, Prime Speaker for this day's gathering. Your presence here is noted and will be recorded in the archives of Curiosity. John stepped forward and tried to stand straighter. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to important meetings. Prime Speaker Veltar, I am Ambassador John Carter, representing Earth and all humanity. We are honored to be here and grateful for this opportunity to speak with the Galactic Council. Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter, though. It was hard to tell with a crystal being. Ambassador Carter, your species is young and eager. This is appreciated. Come. The Council waits to hear what you have to say, though I suspect the conversation will be brief. They walked through corridors that were too wide and too tall for human comfort. The walls were covered in patterns that seemed to move when John wasn't looking directly at them. Other aliens passed them, going about their business. Some were reptilian creatures with scales that changed color. Others looked like they were made of liquid metal. A few seemed to be made of pure energy contained in geometric shapes. All of them stopped to look at the humans. John could feel their attention like weight pressing down on him. Some made sounds that the translator said were amusement. Others simply stared with whatever they used for eyes. None of them looked impressed. The council chamber was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and the walls curved away in a perfect circle. 12 different areas were set up for the 12 major species of the galactic community. Each area was designed for the needs of its occupants. Some had water tanks. Others had gravity fields or energy containment systems. In the center of the chamber was a small raised platform with 3 simple chairs. This was where the humans were expected to sit. The chairs looked tiny compared to the alien seating arrangements around them. John realized this was probably intentional. The aliens wanted the humans to feel small and out of place. As they walked toward their seats, John could hear sounds from all around the chamber. The translator worked overtime trying to convert alien languages into English, but much of what was being said came through as laughter or amusement. The humans were clearly the entertainment for today's session. John Carter stood on the small platform in the center of the massive chamber and looked around at the alien beings who would decide humanity's fate. The platform felt like an island surrounded by an ocean of creatures that could destroy Earth without much effort. He took a deep breath and tried to remember the speech he had practiced hundreds of times during the long journey to the station. Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal body rang like a bell as he called for attention. The sound echoed through the chamber, and all the alien conversations stopped. John could feel 12 different species focusing their attention on him, and it was not a comfortable feeling. Some of them had eyes like humans, but others sensed the world in ways John could not understand. The Council recognizes Ambassador John Carter of the species humans from Sol System 3rd Planet, Veltar announced. His musical voice carried easily through the huge space. The floor is granted for opening statements, though we expect this matter to be resolved quickly. John stepped forward and cleared his throat. The sound seemed tiny in the vast chamber. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, he began. I stand before you today representing not just the governments of Earth, but the hopes and dreams of 8 billion human beings who look to the stars and wonder what awaits them among the infinite possibilities of space. Before he could continue, a harsh sound came from one of the alien seating areas. The translator on John's belt identified it as laughter, but it was the kind of laughter that cut like a knife. The sound came from the Corvani section, where reptilian creatures with scales that shifted between green and gold were making what their species considered amusing sounds. General Vexmore rose from what looked like a throne made of living bone. He was 8 feet tall with a long neck and teeth that were clearly designed for tearing meat. His scales rippled with colors that the translator said indicated mockery and disdain. "Hopes and dreams," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with acid. "How wonderfully primitive. Tell us, human, what exactly do your hopes and dreams offer to beings who have been traveling between galaxies while your species was still learning to make fire?" More laughter came from around the chamber. The Aquatic Depths delegation created bubbling sounds from their water tanks that the translator turned into words dripping with contempt. 8 billion individuals on one small world, said their speaker through mechanical filters. We have single colonies with more population than your entire species. Our youngest children learn mathematics that your greatest scientists have not yet discovered. John felt his face getting red, but he kept his voice steady. We may be young as civilizations are measured, but we bring fresh perspectives and new ways of thinking about old problems. Sometimes an outside view can see solutions that experience has made invisible. This brought even more laughter from the assembled aliens. The Void Walkers phased in and out of normal space as they communicated in ways that hurt John's head to think about. Their speaker was a shadow that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Fresh perspectives, the shadow said in a voice like wind through empty caves. Your species has not even learned to stop fighting among yourselves over resources that we consider worthless. You poison your own world while claiming to seek wisdom among the stars. The synthetic collective added their mechanical voices to the chorus of mockery. They had once been living beings but had transferred their consciousness into machine bodies. Eons ago. Our analysis of human behavior shows patterns consistent with aggressive primitive species in their early development phase, their spokesman announced. Probability of successful galactic integration is less than 0.01%. Dr. Robert Kane shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside the platform. He had warned John that Earth's technological disadvantages would be obvious, but this level of dismissal was worse than their worst-case scenarios. The aliens were not just rejecting humanity's request to join the galactic community. They were treating humans like children who had wandered into a room full of adults discussing important matters. The Etherian delegation began to glow brighter as their energy forms pulsed with what their translator identified as amusement. They had given up physical bodies thousands of years ago and existed as pure consciousness held together by forces that human science barely recognized as possible. Perhaps we should be patient with them, their speaker said in tones that somehow conveyed smug superiority despite having no physical voice. After all, they have achieved remarkable things for such a young species. They have managed to split atoms and even left their home planet to visit their small moon. The condescension in that statement hit John harder than the outright mockery had. The aliens were praising humanity's greatest achievements the way adults might praise a child for learning to tie their shoes. What humans considered incredible breakthroughs, the aliens saw as baby steps toward real civilization. Your nuclear technology is quaint, continued the Etherian speaker. We moved beyond such crude energy sources before your sun finished forming. Your chemical rockets are an interesting approach to space travel, though we stopped using similar methods when your galaxy was still a cloud of gas and dust. The Zephyrians added their harmonic voices to the discussion, unlike the harsh mockery of the Corvani or the cold analysis of the machines. The crystal beings sounded almost sorry for humanity. We do not wish to be unkind, Veltar said with musical tones that somehow conveyed pity. Your species shows promise in the way that all young civilizations show promise. Given sufficient time, perhaps 10 or 20,000 of your years, you might develop technology and wisdom worthy of galactic attention. 10,000 years, repeated General Exmoor with obvious amusement. Assuming they do not destroy themselves first, which historical analysis suggests, is the most likely outcome for species at their current development level. The chamber filled with sounds that needed no translation. Laughter, ridicule, dismissal, and worst of all, pity echoed from every direction. John looked around at beings who could manipulate matter and energy in ways that seemed like magic. Some of them had conquered death itself. Others had built machines that thought faster than biological brains could imagine. A few had learned to exist outside normal space and time. What could humanity possibly offer to beings like these? Earth had no technology that could compete with alien science. Humans had no wisdom that could impress minds that had contemplated the universe for millions of years. They had no resources that advanced civilizations could not create from empty space using technologies that worked like miracles. Captain Lisa Brooks watched the proceedings from the observation area and felt her hand move toward her weapon before she caught herself. These were not enemies to be fought with guns, but the instinct to protect her people was strong. She had seen John handle difficult negotiations before, but never anything like this. The aliens were not just rejecting Earth's request for membership. They were rejecting the idea that humans could ever become worthy of consideration. John felt the weight of representing his entire species pressing down on him like a physical force. Every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there was depending on him to make a good impression. Every child who had dreamed of traveling to other worlds was counting on him to open the door to the galaxy. Every scientist who had worked to push the boundaries of human knowledge was trusting him to show that their efforts had meaning, but standing there surrounded by beings who considered humanity's greatest achievements to be primitive fumbling. John wondered if he had been foolish to think that words could bridge a gap measured in millions of years of development. John Carter raised his hand in the ancient gesture that somehow worked across every species in the galaxy. The laughter and mockery that had filled the enormous chamber slowly died down as alien attention focused on the small human figure standing in the center of their circle. The silence that followed was not respectful, but curious in the way that adults might watch a child about to say something amusing. John felt the weight of their attention pressing down on him from every direction. Beings who could reshape reality with their thoughts were waiting to hear what the primitive human had to say before they sent him home. He had practiced his diplomatic speech about trade agreements and mutual cooperation for months, but those carefully chosen words felt useless now. The aliens had already decided that humanity had nothing to offer them. So John did something that went against every rule of diplomatic protocol he had ever learned. He decided to tell them the truth. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, John said, and his voice carried through the chamber with a strength that surprised even him. You are absolutely correct in everything you have said about my species. This was not what the aliens had expected to hear. The Corvani stopped there. Dismissive hissing. The crystal Zephyrians shifted their harmonic frequencies to tones of confusion. Even the energy beings of Etheria focused their attention with unusual intensity instead of the casual dismissal they had shown before. Dr. Robert Kane leaned forward in his observation seat, wondering if the ambassador had decided to surrender completely. Captain Lisa Brooks tensed as she watched John abandon his prepared diplomatic approach and venture into unknown territory. This was not how First Contact was supposed to work according to any of the training manuals. We are indeed a young species, John continued. Our civilization can be measured in thousands of years while yours spans millions. We have barely left our own solar system while you travel between galaxies as easily as we drive to work. Our technology looks like children's toys compared to your ability to manipulate the basic forces of the universe. The silence in the chamber became deeper as alien minds tried to understand what the human was doing. Most species who came before the council either begged for acceptance or tried to impress them with exaggerated claims about their achievements. This human was doing neither. We do fight among ourselves over resources that you consider worthless, John said, and his voice grew stronger with each word. We have poisoned parts of our own world through ignorance and greed. We have made terrible mistakes that wiser species would have avoided. Our short history is filled with wars and suffering and failures that demonstrate exactly how primitive we really are. General Vexmore of the Corvani delegation made a sound that the translator identified as confusion mixed with suspicion. The reptilian being had expected the human to make desperate excuses or pathetic bargaining attempts. This honest admission of weakness was something completely different. "But you have missed something important about humanity," John said, and now his voice carried a quality that made even the ancient beings around the chamber pay closer attention. "Something that your vast experience and incredible wisdom may have caused you to forget." The Void Walkers solidified completely in normal space-time, which they rarely did except for matters of extreme importance. The synthetic collective focused all their optical sensors on the human with mechanical precision. Even the usually bored Aquatic Depths delegation stopped their dismissive bubbling to listen. "You see our youth as a weakness," John said. "We see it as the fire that drives us forward. You observe our conflicts and call them primitive. We know they are the crucible that forged our strength. You notice our technological limitations and laugh at them. We see them as puzzles that we have not yet solved." John paused and looked around the chamber at beings who had mastered sciences that humans could barely imagine. "But most importantly, you have failed to understand the one thing that makes humanity different from every other species you have encountered. The thing that drives us to reach for the stars despite our limitations. The thing that makes us dare to stand before beings who had conquered the universe before our world was even formed." The chamber was completely silent now. Not the silence of boredom or dismissal, but the silence of minds that were beginning to encounter something they had not expected. Ancient beings who thought they had seen everything the galaxy had to offer were suddenly faced with something new. "What you have failed to understand," John said, and his voice filled the vast space with absolute confidence, "is that we are the species that does not know how to quit." The Etherean energy beings pulsed with light patterns that their translator could not properly convert. The Zephyrions created harmonic frequencies that had not been heard in their communications for thousands of years. Even the emotionless machines of the synthetic collective showed signs of increased processing activity. "Every barrier you place in front of us becomes a challenge we cannot resist," John continued. "Every time someone tells us something is impossible, we take that as an invitation to prove them wrong. You think our short history makes us weak, but it actually makes us hungry for the next achievement, the next breakthrough, the next impossible thing that we can make possible." Lieutenant Commander Paul Mitchell watched from the human observation area as the alien delegates began to shift and stir in ways their species had not done since the session began. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like interest. When our ancestors looked at the sky and saw birds flying, they did not accept that flight was impossible for creatures without wings. John said they studied the problem and built machines that could carry them through the air. When they stared at the ocean and saw depths that would crush any living thing, they did not accept that exploration was impossible. They built vessels that could take them to the bottom of the deepest waters. John gestured toward the vast space station around them. When they gazed at the stars and saw distances that seemed infinite, they did not accept that space travel was beyond their reach. They built rockets and engines and ships that could carry them across the void between worlds. The silence that followed was different from any that had come before. This was not the silence of beings waiting to be entertained, or the silence of minds already made up. This was the silence of ancient civilizations suddenly faced with a perspective they had not considered in millions of years. "You call us primitive because we have not learned to stop fighting," John said. "But those fights taught us that surrender is not an option. You call us ignorant because we have made mistakes that damaged our world. But those mistakes taught us that every action has consequences that must be faced. You call us weak because our technology cannot match yours. But that weakness taught us that there is always a way to become stronger." Prime Speaker Valtar created a harmonic tone that had not been heard in council chambers for centuries. It was the sound of a mind that was being forced to reconsider ideas it had held as absolute truth for longer than human civilization had existed. "And now you tell us we are too young, too limited, too divided to join your galactic community," John sighed, and his final words rang through the chamber like a challenge thrown down before ancient kings. "We have heard that before." John Carter stepped closer to the center of the platform, where a holographic display showed Earth floating in the darkness of space. The small blue and green world looked tiny compared to the massive alien technologies surrounding it, but John felt no shame in its simplicity. He touched the control panel and the image grew larger until the continents and oceans filled the air above him. "This is our world," John said, and his voice carried across the silent chamber to alien ears that had heard the stories of a million civilizations. One small planet orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable galaxy. For most of its history, it was covered in ice or dominated by creatures that could not think beyond their next meal. The rise of intelligent life on Earth is so recent that if you compress the planet's entire history into 1 year, humans would appear in the last few minutes before midnight. The assembled aliens watched the hologram with attention that was no longer dismissive. The synthetic collective's optical sensors tracked every detail while the Voidwalkers remained fully materialized in normal space. Even the usually bored Aquatic Depths delegation had stopped their casual bubbling to focus on the humans' words. But in those few minutes before midnight, something extraordinary happened. John continued as he changed the display to show human cities and achievements. A species that had spent most of its existence barely surviving learned to reshape its world. We discovered fire and agriculture and writing and mathematics. We built civilizations that spanned continents and developed technologies that let us communicate across vast distances. General Vexmore of the Corvani delegation shifted uneasily as memory stirred of his own species. Distant past before biotechnology had made everything easy. There had been a time when the Corvani too had struggled against impossible odds, though that was so long ago it seemed like ancient legend. You mentioned that we went from first flight to walking on our moon in less than 100 years, John said as the hologram showed images of early aircraft and spacecraft. Let me put that in perspective for you. In less than 2 centuries we went from traveling by horse to building ships that could cross the void between worlds. Most of your species took thousands of years to achieve similar progress. The display changed to show a timeline that made even the ancient beings in the chamber pause to consider. Human technological advancement was not just fast by their standards, it was unprecedented in the galaxy's recorded history. The Wright brothers made the first powered flight in 1903, John said as the hologram showed a simple wooden aircraft barely leaving the ground. 66 years later, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of our moon. In the span of a single human lifetime, we conquered both atmosphere and space. Prime Speaker Veltar-S crystal body rang with harmonic frequencies. That had not been heard in his species' communications for millennia. The sounds indicated deep thought mixed with something that might have been concern. But speed of development is not what makes us unique, John continued as he gestured to his small team. Captain Brooks here was told that a damaged space station with 300 civilians aboard could not be saved. The radiation levels were too high, the structural damage too severe, and the time window too narrow. Every expert, including some of your own, declared the situation hopeless. Captain Lisa Brooks stood straighter as alien attention focused on her. She had not expected to become part of the ambassador's presentation, but she could see the strategic wisdom in what he was doing. Captain Brooks did not accept that 300 people had to die because the experts said rescue was impossible, John said. She developed a new approach using equipment that was not designed for the job and techniques that had never been tested. She saved all 300 civilians and brought them home safely. The hologram now showed the rescue operation in detail. Alien minds that had mastered sciences beyond human comprehension found themselves impressed by the creative solution to what they had calculated as an unsolvable problem. Dr. Robert Kane was told by his professors that certain theoretical barriers in quantum mechanics could never be crossed. John continued as the display shifted to show complex mathematical equations. And the mathematics were clear, the physics were absolute, and the limitations were fundamental to the nature of reality itself. Dr. Kane felt uncomfortable with the attention, but understood that John was building toward something important. The equations floating above them represented years of work that had changed human understanding of the universe. Dr. Kane did not accept that reality had limitations that could not be overcome, John said. He found new ways to approach old problems, and discovered that what everyone called impossible was simply very difficult. His work revolutionized our understanding of space and time and opened doors that our greatest minds had assumed were permanently closed. The Etherian energy beings pulsed with light patterns that indicated intense interest. The equations shown in the hologram contained insights that even their advanced mathematics had not fully explored. Lieutenant Commander Paul Mitchell was faced with defensive scenarios that your own war computers calculated as unwinnable. John continued as tactical displays filled the air. Enemy forces with superior technology and overwhelming numbers attacking positions that could not be reinforced or supplied. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had spent his career finding ways to win battles that should have been lost. The tactical innovations he had developed were now standard procedure throughout Earth's defense forces. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell did not accept that superior enemy forces guaranteed defeat, John said. He developed new strategies and tactics that turned our weaknesses into advantages and our disadvantages into strengths. Battles that should have ended in disaster became victories that protected our world. The alien delegates exchanged communications in frequencies and methods that human senses could not detect. The examples John was presenting were not the boasts of primitives but documented achievements that their own intelligence networks could verify. These are not unusual humans, John said, and his voice grew stronger with conviction. Every human carries this same refusal to accept defeat. Every person on our world has ancestors who survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have wiped out our species completely. We are all descended from individuals who looked at impossible odds and decided to find a way through anyway. The chamber stirred with activity as ancient minds tried to process this new perspective on what they had dismissed as primitive stubbornness. What they had seen as humanity's weakness might actually be something else entirely. You have grown comfortable in your superiority, John said, and now his words carried the weight of absolute truth. You have solved the problems you wanted to solve and declared the remaining challenges beyond reach. You have accepted that certain things cannot be done and certain limits cannot be crossed. The silence that followed was profound as beings who had considered themselves the ultimate achievement of galactic evolution found themselves faced with an uncomfortable question. But we have not accepted those limits, John continued. We are still hungry for the next breakthrough, still eager for the next discovery, still determined to prove that the word impossible is just another way of saying not yet accomplished. Prime Speaker Valtar created a harmonic tone that resonated through every crystal in his body and echoed off the chamber walls. It was a sound of recognition mixed with something that had not been heard in Zephyrian communications for thousands of years. It was the sound of a mind encountering genuine surprise. John Carter looked around the massive chamber at beings who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years and felt no fear. The mockery was gone, replaced by something he had not dared to hope for when he first stepped onto this platform. The ancient aliens were actually listening to him with the kind of attention reserved for ideas that might change everything. You want to know what truly makes humanity different from every species you have encountered, John said as he prepared to deliver the words that would define his people's place in the galaxy. What drives us to reach beyond our limitations and attempt things that wiser beings would never try? The energy beings of Etheria pulsed with light patterns that indicated deep consideration. The synthetic collective's processing units worked at maximum capacity as they analyzed the implications of everything they had heard. Even the usually dismissive Corvani delegation had stopped their contemptuous hissing to focus completely on the human ambassador. We refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible, John said, and his voice filled the enormous space with absolute conviction, not just for ourselves but for others as well. While you have been content to maintain your positions of power and preserve the status quo for countless eons, we have been busy proving that limitations exist only until someone finds a way around them. The holographic display above John shifted to show images of human history, but not the glorious achievements he had shown before. These were pictures of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. A teacher working with disabled children who were told they could never learn. A doctor treating diseases that were considered incurable. A scientist studying problems that colleagues said were waste of time. Christopher Columbus was told by every expert in his time that sailing west to reach the Indies was impossible, John continued. The distance was too great, the ocean too vast, and the risks too deadly. Kings and scholars and navigators all agreed that the journey could not be made. General Exmoor found himself remembering stories from his own species' early history. There had been Corvanni explorers who had attempted journeys that seemed impossible, and sometimes they had succeeded in ways that changed everything. Columbus did not accept their limitations, John said. He found new lands and open pathways that connected worlds that had never known each other existed. The experts were wrong because they based their calculations on what they knew instead of what might be possible. The display changed to show two human brothers working with a simple flying machine. Orville and Wilbur Wright were told that human flight was impossible because humans did not have wings and were too heavy to leave the ground. Every scientist and engineer of their time knew that powered flight was beyond human capability. The Void Walkers phased slightly as they communicated across dimensions in ways that made reality ripple around them. Their attention was completely focused on the humans' words in a way that had not happened during a council session for centuries. The Wright brothers did not accept that humans were meant to stay on the ground, John continued. They studied birds and wind and lifting forces until they understood what everyone else had missed. On December 17, 1903, they proved that the impossible was simply something that had not been done yet. The images shifted again to show human scientists working in laboratories and research facilities. Marie Curie was told that women could not be real scientists and that radioactivity was too dangerous to study safely. Albert Einstein was told that his theories about space and time were too strange to be true. Jonas Salk was told that creating a vaccine for polio was impossible because the virus was too complex. Dr. Robert Kane felt a surge of pride as he recognized the pattern John was revealing. Every great human achievement had begun with someone refusing to accept that something could not be done. Each of them ignored the limitations placed on them by experts and authorities, John said. Curie won 2 Nobel Prizes and opened entirely new fields of science. Einstein revolutionized our understanding of the universe itself. Salk created the vaccine that saved millions of children from a disease that had terrorized the world. Prime Speaker Veltar S. Crystal Body created harmonic frequencies that had not been heard in Zephyrian communications for thousands of years. The sounds indicated something that his species had almost forgotten how to feel. It was the emotion of being genuinely surprised by new possibilities. But here is what you must understand about humanity, John said as he stepped closer to the edge of the platform, bringing himself as close as possible to the assembled alien delegates. We do not just refuse to accept limitations for ourselves. We refuse to accept them for anyone. The chamber became completely silent as ancient minds processed this statement. Species that had ruled the galaxy longer than human civilization had existed suddenly found themselves confronting an idea they had not considered in millions of years. When we see others struggling with problems that seem impossible, we do not walk away and declare the situation hopeless, John continued. We see challenges that need to be solved and people who need help, and we find ways to make things work. The holographic display now showed images of humans working together in ways that transcended normal cooperation. Rescue workers saving people from disasters. Doctors treating patients who traveled across the world for help. Teachers sharing knowledge with students who had been written off by other educators. You have declared certain challenges impossible and certain species unworthy, John said, and now his words carried the weight of absolute truth. You have grown comfortable with the idea that some problems cannot be solved and some limitations cannot be overcome. You have accepted the status quo as permanent and unchangeable. Captain Lisa Brooks watched from the observation area as alien delegates began to shift and stir in ways that indicated deep consideration. The dismissive attitudes they had shown at the beginning of the session were completely gone. "We have not accepted your limitations," John declared. "Every challenge you have declared impossible becomes a puzzle we cannot resist trying to solve. Every problem you have given up on becomes an opportunity for us to prove that giving up is not the only option." The Aquatic Depths delegation created sounds through their water systems that translated as amazement mixed with something that might have been hope. The mechanical voices of the synthetic collective indicated processing activity at levels they rarely achieved. "So, when you laugh at our presence here and dismiss us as too young or too primitive, you are making the same mistake that every establishment has made when faced with human determination," John said as he prepared to deliver his final challenge. "You are assuming that because something has never been done before it cannot be done at all." Admiral Zephos of the Voidwalkers materialized completely in normal space-time as he spoke for the first time during the session. His voice carried across dimensions with the weight of eons. "And what, Ambassador Carter, do you propose to accomplish that we with all our knowledge and power have not?" John smiled, and somehow that simple human expression was visible to every species present despite their vastly different ways of perceiving the world. "Everything you have given up on, Admiral. Every challenge you have declared impossible. Every problem you have decided is not worth solving anymore. We are going to prove you wrong not with words but with results." The silence that followed was unlike anything that had ever existed in the council chamber. Beings who had considered themselves the ultimate achievement of galactic evolution found themselves face to face with a species that specialized in making the impossible merely difficult. Finally, Prime Speaker Veltar created a harmonic tone that resonated through every crystal in the chamber and beyond. "The Council will deliberate on Earth's petition for membership. This session is adjourned until we reach a decision." As the alien delegates began to file out, many of them cast thoughtful glances toward the small human delegation. The laughter and mockery that had filled the chamber at the beginning of the session were gone. In their place was something far more valuable and far more dangerous to the established order. The aliens were beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, the impossible was not as permanent as they had thought.